The straight razor gleamed cold in the gaslight. Senator Edgar Caldwell's hand struck like a viper, leaving a crimson mark across the young maid's cheek. The delicate china teacup she'd been carrying shattered against the imported marble floor of the Blackwood mansion. "Incompetent girl," he spat, adjusting his gold cufflinks as if he'd merely brushed away a fly. "Clean this mess." From the doorway, Eliza Blackwood watched, frozen. Her gloved hand tightened around the doorframe, knuckles white beneath the silk. She'd been raised to believe that ladies of quality did not intervene in such matters, that they turned blind eyes to ugliness for the sake of propriety. But the trembling girl on the floor couldn't have been more than 16. "Perhaps," Eliza began, her voice barely audible. The senator's head snapped toward her, eyes flashing with something primal that made her stomach clench. But before he could speak, Harrison Blackwood's firm grip closed around Eliza's elbow, pulling her from the doorway. "A word, daughter," her father said, steering her down the corridor with the practiced efficiency of a man accustomed to redirecting unwanted situations. In his wood-paneled study, surrounded by hunting trophies and business accolades, Harrison released her arm. At 56, he remained imposingly tall, his silver-threaded hair and tailored suit projecting the power that had built the Blackwood mining fortune. "You will be that man's wife in 1 month," he said, voice controlled, but carrying the edge of steel that had cowed railroad barons and politicians alike. "It would serve you well to learn discretion." "He struck her over spilled tea," Eliza said, hating how small her voice sounded. Harrison's expression didn't change. "The senator has secured the Western mining permits we need. His connections have opened doors that would otherwise remain closed to us." He straightened papers on his mahogany desk. "Your mother understood such arrangements." The casual invocation of her mother sent a familiar ache through Eliza's chest. Charlotte Blackwood had died, officially of pneumonia, when Eliza was 10. 13 years had passed, but her absence remained a hollow space that nothing had ever filled. "Mother taught me that true worth lies in one's actions, not position," Eliza said quietly. Something flickered across Harrison's face, a shadow so brief she might have imagined it. "Your mother was an idealist. In the end, her ideals did not serve her well." He checked his pocket watch. "I expect you to appear at dinner properly attired. The Prescotts will be joining us." Alone in her bedroom, Eliza stood before the gilt-framed mirror, seeing not her reflection, but her mother's face. They shared the same chestnut hair, the same determined chin. But where Charlotte's eyes had sparkled with conviction, Eliza's held only uncertainty. She moved to her dressing table, fingers finding the hidden lever that released a small drawer beneath the surface. Her mother's final gift. Inside lay Charlotte's journal and a yellowed newspaper clipping Eliza had saved for 2 years. "Local rancher rescues traveler from blizzard," the headline read. The brief article described how a man named Wyatt Sullivan had found a half-frozen traveler in a snowstorm, carrying them 3 miles to his cabin and nursing them back to health before they were collected by family. What the article didn't mention was that the traveler had been Eliza herself, who had fled into the night after a particularly vicious argument with her father about her first arranged marriage. It didn't mention how Harrison had paid the newspaper editor to bury the story, paid the doctor for silence, paid everyone to forget. But Eliza remembered the strong hands pulling her from the snow, the gruff voice cutting through the whiteout. "Don't you die on me, not tonight." She remembered waking in a small cabin, bandaged and warm, to find a weathered man with gray-blue eyes feeding her broth, asking nothing of her. Not her name, not her station, nothing. For 3 days he'd saved her. Then her father's men arrived with a doctor and took her away like stolen property. She'd been too weak to speak, too feverish to protest. But she heard her father in the hallway. "Never mention this. Associating with frontier trash ruins her prospects." Beside the clipping lay her mother's journal, its leather cover worn soft with handling. Eliza opened to where a silk ribbon marked her place, running her fingers over her mother's elegant script. "Catherine has agreed to help me gather evidence. What Harrison is doing to those mining communities cannot stand. The families displaced, the accidents, that silence opposition. I cannot remain complicit any longer. If something should happen to me, the documents are with Catherine Stone." Eliza turned to her window where the evening edition of the Boston Herald lay open. 2 headlines caught her eye. The first announced the impending maiden voyage of the RMS Titanic, described as unsinkable and a marvel of modern engineering. The second, smaller headline made her stomach clench. Mining magnate's daughter to wed senator. Social event of the season. Her future laid out in black and white without her consent. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her lady's maid, Ruta, entered with an evening gown of midnight blue silk. "Your father requested this for dinner, miss," Rose said, her eyes carefully averted. But Eliza noted the redness around them, the slight tremble in her hands. "Was it you in the parlor with the senator?" Eliza asked softly. Rose shook her head. "My younger sister, miss. First day in service." Something hardened in Eliza's chest. "Tell her she's to attend only to me from now on. I'll speak to Mrs. Hughes about it." After Rose helped her dress, Eliza returned to the hidden drawer. Behind the journal lay a small silver locket containing a miniature portrait of Charlotte. Eliza fastened it around her neck, tucking it beneath her gown where it rested cool against her skin. Then she noticed something she'd overlooked, a folded piece of paper wedged in the drawer's corner. She eased it out, recognizing her mother's handwriting, though more hurried than her usual careful script. "Catherine, Harrison is involved in the fire. I have proof. Meet me at—" The letter ended there, unfinished. The date at the top matched the day Charlotte Blackwood was found dead in her bath. A suicide, according to the official report. Eliza's hands began to shake. She'd been told her mother had succumbed to melancholy, that the laudanum prescribed for her nerves had led to an accidental overdose. But this letter suggested something far darker. Catherine Stone had been a journalist investigating labor conditions in mining towns. She had disappeared shortly after Charlotte's death, reportedly killed in a tenement fire. 2 women silenced. 2 deaths separated by weeks. One connection, Harrison Blackwood. That night, as forks clinked against fine china and Senator Caldwell discussed tariffs with her father, Eliza made her decision. Dawn hadn't yet broken when she stood before her mirror, scissors in hand. With each cut, heavy locks of chestnut hair fell to the floor until what remained was boyishly short. She donned a stolen maid's uniform, rough wool stockings replacing silk, worn boots instead of satin slippers. From her father's study, she took a significant sum from his emergency funds and something far more valuable, a leather folio containing ownership documents for Blackwood Mining's Western operations. Knowledge was power, and she intended to arm herself with both. In her own hand, she penned a note on her father's stationery. "I know the truth about Mother and Catherine Stone. Don't look for me." She left it prominently on his desk, knowing the threat it contained would give him pause before setting bloodhounds on her trail. The pre-dawn air bit at her exposed neck as she slipped through the servants' entrance. The Blackwood estate slumbered around her, a monument to wealth built on others' suffering. A light burned in the gatehouse, forcing her to scale the property's eastern wall, scraping her palms on rough stone. She didn't look back. At South Station, Eliza purchased a third-class ticket west, the destination chosen for its proximity to Silver Creek, the small mining town where Wyatt Sullivan's ranch lay. The clerk barely glanced at her, seeing only another young woman in serviceable clothes, one of thousands seeking work in the expanding territories. As the train pulled away, newsboys hawked the morning edition. "Titanic sets sail today. Unsinkable marvel embarks on maiden voyage." Eliza settled into her seat, hand unconsciously touching the locket beneath her plain shirtwaist. She thought of the opulent ship with its wealthy passengers, a floating palace of certainty and privilege. For the first time in her life, she had chosen uncertainty instead. The rhythmic clatter of the train lulled her into an uneasy sleep. She dreamed of her mother, of falling snow, and of strong hands pulling her from darkness. "You have your mother's eyes." The quiet observation startled Eliza awake. Across from her sat an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun. Despite the simplicity of her dark traveling dress, something in her bearing suggested refinement. "Pardon me?" Eliza asked, instantly wary. The woman smiled faintly. "I said nothing, dear." She returned to her book, but her eyes, sharp and knowing, lingered a moment too long on Eliza's face. When Eliza disembarked at the next stop to stretch her legs, she noticed the woman again, watching her from a distance. Unnerved, she ducked into the telegraph office, where she sent a wire to Harold Winters, a former newspaper colleague of Catherine Stone's, whom she'd secretly corresponded with for months. The reply came faster than expected. KS investigating Blackwood mining before disappearance. Find Wyatt Sullivan, Silver Creek. Trust no one. Back on the train, Eliza studied her map. Silver Creek sat in a mineral-rich valley, surrounded by Blackwood mining operations. The company town had once been independent before her father's expansion. The sun was setting when she noticed a man observing her from the end of the car. Tall, with a dark coat and hat pulled low, he seemed to be memorizing her face. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. Ice spread through her veins. Had her father's men found her so quickly? She made her way to the dining car, hoping to lose him in the dinner crowd. But when she glanced back, he was still following, his stride purposeful. Panic rising, Eliza slipped between two freight cars, the wind whipping at her clothes. The door to a baggage car stood ajar. She squeezed inside, hiding behind stacked trunks as footsteps approached. The door creaked open. Heavy boots scuffed against the wooden floor. "Miss," called a conductor, his lantern casting long shadows. "Passengers aren't permitted in the baggage car." The boots hesitated, then retreated. Eliza exhaled, trembling with relief and the realization that her journey had only begun. Yet danger already pursued her. 4 days later, a supply wagon left Eliza at the outskirts of Silver Creek, a single dusty street lined with weathered buildings. The town had the desperate feel of a place slowly dying, its wooden structures fading like old photographs beneath the harsh western sun. Men in dirt-streaked clothes eyed her with undisguised curiosity. A woman pulled two small children closer as she passed, as if Eliza carried something contagious. "You looking for something, city girl?" The voice belonged to an elderly man sitting outside the general store, whittling a piece of wood with practiced strokes. Despite his age, he sat ramrod straight with the unmistakable bearing of a military man. "I'm seeking work," Eliza replied, clutching her canvas bag tighter. "Perhaps domestic service." The man squinted at her, taking in her short hair and callous-free hands. "Not much call for that here. This ain't Boston." The observation hit too close to home. "How do you know I'm from Boston?" A dry chuckle escaped him. "Your boots are Eastern-made, and you stand like someone who's never carried water uphill." He pocketed his knife. "Moses Harrington, town elder, for whatever that's worth these days." "Hannah Grant," Eliza replied, using the name she'd chosen for her new identity. Moses nodded toward the hills. "Sullivan Ranch is 3 miles that way. Wyatt sometimes takes on help during calving season." Her heart leaped at the name. "Sullivan? Is he reliable?" Something like respect flickered in the old man's eyes. "Keeps to himself, lost his wife few years back, but he's fair, and his word's good as gold." He studied her more carefully. "Be straight with him, though. Man's got no patience for lies." The walk to the Sullivan Ranch took Eliza through scrubby foothills that gradually opened to a sweeping valley. The land had a wild beauty that Boston's manicured gardens could never capture. Raw and uncompromising, yet somehow inviting. The ranch itself was smaller than she remembered. A simple cabin with a half-finished addition, sagging barn, and crooked fence posts. In the distance, a lone figure worked, driving new fence posts into the ground with methodical strength. Each step toward him seemed to require more courage than the last. The man she approached was both stranger and savior, someone who had once held her life in his hands without knowing her name. Wyatt Sullivan straightened as she approached, resting his weight on the post driver. Taller than she remembered, with broad shoulders shaped by years of physical labor. His face, partially shadowed by his hat, revealed little beyond a strong jaw dusted with stubble. "I'm looking for work," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He studied her for a long moment. The gray-blue eyes were exactly as she remembered, observant, guarded, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much but persevered anyway. "Can you work, or are you running from something?" His voice was low, graveled with disuse. The directness caught her off guard. "Both," she admitted. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "Name?" "Hannah Grant." The lie felt leaden on her tongue. "Orphan, I heard you might need help." He continued to study her, taking in her city-pale skin and determined stance. "Wyatt Sullivan, this is my land." He gestured at the modest spread with the post driver. "It's not much." I don't need much, she replied. I can offer the barn loft, 1 meal a day, no pay till you prove yourself. I can prove myself. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. He handed her an axe and pointed at a pile of logs. Split that cord. The axe felt awkward in her hands, its weight foreign. Her first swing barely bit into the wood. The second was no better. But by the 10th, she'd found a rhythm. By the 20th, her palms blistered, blood seeping through tender skin. Still, she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This was the price of her new beginning. The sun was setting when she split the final log, her arms screaming in protest. She set the axe down, met Wyatt's gaze, and saw something like respect in his eyes. Barn's yours, he said simply. Supper at sundown. That evening, she watched through the cabin window as he moved about the small space, preparing a simple stew over an iron stove. Same table, same chair. The room where she'd awakened, bandaged and saved 2 years ago. You coming in or watching me all night? He called without turning. Heat flushed her cheeks as she entered. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and herbs, Spartan but clean. He ladled stew into 2 tin bowls, sliding one across the rough-hewn table. They ate in silence, but when he handed her a spoon, their fingers brushed. He paused, frowned, staring at her hand for a heartbeat too long. Something wrong? She asked, pulse quickening. He shook his head. No, just thought I recognized. He trailed off, returning to his bowl. Never mind. That night, Eliza crawled into the hay of the barn loft, muscles aching, hands stinging. Beyond the rough wooden walls, coyotes yipped in the distance. The world felt impossibly vast compared to her sheltered Boston existence. He didn't recognize her face, but his hands remembered. She'd seen it in that moment of confusion, that flicker of almost recognition. How long before the rest followed? I'm lying to the man who saved my life, she whispered into the darkness. But if she told the truth, he'd see her as Eliza Blackwood, the heiress, the burden, the daughter of the man who'd called him trash. Outside, the wind whispered through pine trees. Spring was coming, but winter wasn't quite finished with the land. Much like the truth, dormant but not dead, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Her first week at the Sullivan Ranch reshaped Eliza in ways Boston's finest finishing school never could. Each morning began before dawn, feeding livestock and hauling water. Each evening ended with muscles she never knew existed, protesting their discovery. Wyatt worked alongside her, not behind her, teaching without patronizing. He showed her how to mend harnesses with strong, even stitches, how to tell when a calf was breech before the mother struggled, how to read the land's subtle signs of changing seasons. Gradually, his initial suspicions softened into something less guarded. Not trust, not yet, but a wary acceptance. In the evenings, they sat by the fire in companionable silence. He carved fence posts with a wickedly sharp knife, transforming raw wood into functional art with economical movements. She mended shirts and socks, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple utility of her work. Why do you live alone? She asked one evening, the question escaping before she could reconsider. Wyatt's hands stilled, wood shavings curling at his feet. For so long, he said nothing that she thought he wouldn't answer. My wife, Rebecca, he finally said, voice flat. She died 3 winters ago. Eliza's hands paused in their mending. I'm sorry. I was checking trap lines. Gone 4 days. His voice grew distant. Came home to find her grave. Neighbors had buried her. Pneumonia took her fast. The blade of his knife caught firelight as he turned it slowly. I should have been here. The raw guilt in his voice resonated with something in Eliza, the peculiar shame of surviving when someone else hadn't, of carrying on when others couldn't. You can't blame yourself for being gone, she said softly. Can I? He set down his knife, eyes reflecting fire. She needed me. I wasn't here. That's the only fact that matters. Before she could respond, a knock at the door broke the moment. Wyatt's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle propped by the hearth before he caught himself. A young woman stood on the porch, a small boy clutching her skirts. In the lamplight, Eliza could see her careworn face was once beautiful, now etched with lines of worry beyond her years. Evening, Wyatt, she said, voice soft but determined. Luke's cough is back. I was hoping you might have more of that willow bark tea Rebecca used to make. Wyatt's expression softened slightly. Come in, Abigail. The woman hesitated on the threshold, eyes widening at the sight of Eliza. I didn't know you had company. This is Hannah, Wyatt said. She's helping with the spring work. Abigail Reed, the woman said, her guarded expression suggesting Eliza represented something unexpected and potentially threatening. This is my son, Luke. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, with solemn eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. He made no sound, only pressed closer to his mother's side. Eliza smiled gently. Hello, Luke. The boy didn't respond, but his intense gaze never left her face. Luke doesn't speak, Abigail explained, one protective hand on his shoulder. Not since his father passed. Wyatt busied himself searching a cabinet for the tea while Eliza invited them to sit. Abigail perched on the edge of a chair as if ready to flee at any moment. You're new to Silver Creek, Abigail observed, voice carefully neutral. Yes, Eliza replied. Just arrived. Not many come to Silver Creek these days. More leave than arrive. Abigail's eyes held a warning, especially since Blackwood Mining expanded operations. The name sent a jolt through Eliza. She kept her expression neutral with effort. Oh? They're buying up independent claims, forcing out smaller operations. Abigail's voice lowered. Or worse. Wyatt returned with a small pouch of dried herbs, 2 pinches steeped in hot water, he instructed, clearly ending the conversation. Same as Rebecca always made. Abigail took it with grateful hands. Thank you. We should get back before dark. She hesitated. The company men have been watching our place again. A muscle tightened in Wyatt's jaw. I'll ride over tomorrow. Check your fences. After they left, Eliza's curiosity overwhelmed her caution. What happened to Abigail's husband? Wyatt stared into the fire. Marcus Reed was a good man, found gold on his property last year, made the mistake of filing a claim before securing investors. His voice hardened. Had a mining accident a week later. You don't believe it was an accident. Neither does half the town. He prodded the fire. But proving it is another matter entirely, especially when the company owns the sheriff 3 counties over. The company? Blackwood Mining? Eliza asked, hating how her father's name felt in her mouth. Wyatt's gaze sharpened. You've heard of them? She backpedaled quickly, just what Abigail mentioned. He studied her for a long moment before answering. Harrison Blackwood started buying up land here 10 years ago. Small operations at first, then bigger ones. Those who sell get fair prices. Those who don't. He shrugged, the gesture communicating volumes. Eliza's stomach clenched at this confirmation of her worst fears. The man described sounded nothing like the father she thought she knew. A stern businessman, certainly, but not a murderer. Yet hadn't she found evidence of exactly that in her mother's unfinished letter? The next morning, while mucking out the barn, Eliza discovered an old wooden chest tucked beneath a pile of unused tack. Curiosity drew her to it, though she knew snooping through Wyatt's possessions crossed a line. Inside lay a woman's shawl, carefully folded, a set of letters tied with faded ribbon, and a small daguerreotype in a tarnished frame. The photograph showed a younger Wyatt beside a woman with intelligent eyes and a determined mouth. But what caught Eliza's breath was the second image. Wyatt with another woman, this one with striking features and confident posture. She turned it over, reading the inscription. Wyatt and Catherine, Denver, 1910. Catherine Stone. The photograph slipped from her suddenly numb fingers. Wyatt had known the journalist her mother had mentioned, the woman who'd disappeared after Charlotte's death. This wasn't coincidence. This was confirmation that she'd come to the right place. But before she could process this revelation, Wyatt's voice came from the barn entrance. Found something interesting? Eliza spun around, guilt heating her cheeks. I'm sorry, I was cleaning and decided to go through my personal belongings. His voice was dangerously quiet. The chest was open, she lied. I saw the photograph fall out. He approached slowly, picking up the fallen image. His expression softened imperceptibly as he looked at it. Catherine Stone. Good woman. Smart as a whip and twice as sharp. Who was she? Eliza asked, careful to sound merely curious. Journalist. Wrote about mining conditions, labor disputes. A shadow crossed his face. Died in a tenement fire back east. At least, That's the official story. You don't believe it? His eyes met hers, hard and assessing. Catherine knew too much about certain mining befrieden, had evidence of illegal practices. Then suddenly, she's dead in a fire that destroys all her papers. He slipped the photograph into his pocket. Convenient, wouldn't you say? Eliza's mouth went dry. Very convenient. Wyatt replaced the chest, his movements deliberate. You ask a lot of questions, Hannah. I'm sorry if I... Everyone's running from something, he interrupted. I don't need to know what you're running from. But if it follows you here... He left the warning unfinished. That afternoon, a commotion erupted in the pasture. A section of fence had broken, allowing several cattle to escape toward the road. Without thinking, Eliza ran for the nearest horse, swinging into the saddle with the practiced ease of someone who'd ridden since childhood. She and Wyatt worked in tandem, circling the strays and driving them back toward the enclosure. When the last cow was secured, she caught Wyatt watching her with renewed suspicion. You ride like you were born to it, he observed. Eliza realized her mistake too late. A homeless orphan would never have her level of horsemanship. Beginner's luck, she offered weakly. That wasn't luck. He studied her, eyes narrowed. Where'd you learn to ride like that? Her heart pounded. Here and there, odd jobs. He didn't press, but the seed of doubt had clearly been planted. That night, for the first time, he locked his cabin door. The following day, Eliza ventured into town for supplies, grateful for the chance to escape Wyatt's increasingly scrutinizing gaze. At the general store, she overheard miners discussing a recent cave-in at one of the Blackwood operations. Third accident this month, a grizzled man muttered. Anyone who speaks about unionizing ends up buried or disappeared. Keep your voice down, his companion warned, eyes darting to the street where a tall figure passed. Walsh has ears everywhere. Eliza followed their gaze to a man whose mere presence seemed to silence conversation. Tall, with a dark coat and hat, the same silhouette she'd seen on the train. Daniel Walsh, she learned from whispered comments, was Blackwood Mining's enforcer, the man who handled problems for the company. As if sensing her scrutiny, Walsh turned. Their eyes met briefly before Moses Harrington stepped between them, blocking her from view. Careful, girl, the old man murmured. Some attention you don't want in this town. As Walsh mounted his horse to leave, Eliza noticed something unexpected. A momentary hesitation as the man's gaze lingered on Wyatt's ranch in the distance. His expression shifted briefly, revealing something almost like regret before the cold mask returned. He removed his hat, ran a hand through dark hair that carried the same slight wave as Wyatt's, then replaced it with a sharp, decisive movement. Something in the gesture reminded her of the rancher who had saved her, though she couldn't quite place the similarity. That man, Moses murmured beside her, carries more ghosts than most. You know him well? Eliza asked. Known him since he first rode into Silver Creek 7 years ago. Always Harrison Blackwood's man, but... The old soldier's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. There are moments when I see someone else in there. Someone fighting to get out. Moses guided her into the small library, where dusty shelves held more cobwebs than books. Why are you really here, Miss Grant? And don't feed me that orphan story. Your hands are too soft despite a week of ranch work. Eliza hesitated, weighing her options. I'm researching the mining company's practices, she said, a partial truth. For a friend. Moses's expression remained skeptical, but he led her to a back shelf. Newspaper archives. Not much, but might be what you're looking for. Among the yellowed papers, Eliza found what she sought. Articles by Catherine Stone detailing unsafe mining practices, environmental destruction, and suspicious deaths associated with Blackwood Mining's expansion. One piece mentioned an anonymous source providing internal documents. Had that been her mother? The library clerk, an elderly woman with rheumy eyes, noticed her interest. You're reading about Catherine Stone? She stayed in Silver Creek for months, investigating Blackwood Mining before she disappeared. Disappeared? Eliza echoed. I heard she died in a fire. The woman shook her head. That's what they reported, but she left town suddenly, saying she had evidence that would bring down the company. Never heard from again. As Eliza left the library, she noticed the silver-haired woman from the train watching from a seamstress shop across the street. Their eyes met, and the woman beckoned her inside. You're far from Boston, Miss Blackwood. she said once they were alone among bolts of fabric. Eliza froze. You're mistaken. My name is Hannah Grant, and I'm Eleanor Johnson, simple seamstress." The woman's smile held no warmth. "We can pretend if you wish, but it wastes precious time." She gestured to a chair. "You look remarkably like your mother." Charlotte always had those eyes, so determined. "You knew my mother?" Eliza whispered, shock overriding caution. "Better than most." Eleanor's gnarled fingers traced a pattern on the cutting table. "Be careful. Walls have ears in Silver Creek, especially since Blackwood took control." "Who are you really?" Eleanor merely shook her head. "Not here, not now, but know this, you're in more danger than you realize. Harrison will not let his only heir disappear without consequence." On her way back to the ranch, Eliza's mind reeled with questions. Who was this woman who recognized her? How had she known Charlotte? And why was she in Silver Creek of all places? Her preoccupation meant she didn't notice the silver locket had slipped from around her neck until she reached the ranch. Panic seized her. The locket contained her mother's portrait, a direct link to her true identity. She searched frantically along the trail and around the barn, but found nothing. That evening, as they ate dinner in strained silence, she noticed Wyatt watching her with increased intensity. "You seem troubled," he observed. "Lost something important," she admitted. He said nothing, but his hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, the same pocket where she'd seen him place Catherine's photograph. What Eliza couldn't see was Walsh himself finding the silver locket along the trail, hours before Wyatt discovered it. He'd opened it, studied Charlotte Blackwood's portrait with an unreadable expression, then deliberately placed it where Wyatt would find it on his usual route to check fence lines. Walsh had lingered in the shadows of the pines, watching as the rancher discovered the trinket, noted the exact moment recognition dawned on Wyatt's face. "Let her stay a while longer," Walsh had whispered to himself, though he couldn't have explained why. "Just a little while." Then he'd mounted his horse and ridden back to town, composing his report to Harrison Blackwood with strategic omissions about exactly what he'd found. Later, as she climbed to the barn loft, she heard voices from outside. Creeping to the small window, she saw Wyatt and Moses in heated conversation. "Walsh is asking about your new hired help," Moses was saying, his voice low but clear in the still night. "Blackwood's looking for his daughter." "Daughter?" Wyatt's confusion was evident even in silhouette. "What are you talking about?" "My son works for Blackwood in Boston," Moses explained. "Says Eliza Blackwood disappeared after finding documents about her mother's death. Harrison's offering a fortune to whoever finds her." Eliza's heart thundered in her chest. Her ruse was unraveling faster than she'd anticipated. Soon, Wyatt would know everything: her identity, her father's crimes, her own deception. The question wasn't if the truth would emerge, but when, and what price she would pay when it did. The calendar on Moses's wall marked early April 1912, a volatile time in the territory when spring thaws brought both renewal and danger. Roads turned to mud, rivers rose beyond their banks, and the delicate balance of mountain life teetered between the lingering grip of winter and the promise of warmer days. For Eliza, this precarious seasonal shift mirrored her own uncertain position. She had been at the Sullivan Ranch for nearly 2 weeks now, and time was running out to maintain her deception. The wolves came with the spring thaw, hungry after the lean winter months. Eliza woke to their howling, a primal sound that raised goosebumps along her arms. For a moment, she lay frozen in the barn loft, heart racing as the eerie chorus circled the property. Then came a different sound, the cabin door slamming open, followed by the metallic click of a rifle being loaded. She scrambled down the ladder, grabbing a pitchfork, the only weapon at hand, before rushing into the yard. The full moon illuminated Wyatt's silhouette as he moved toward the livestock pen, rifle raised. "Stay behind me," he ordered without turning, his voice tight. Eliza seized a burning brand from the fire pit instead, holding it aloft as they approached the pen. In the flickering light, she could see the cattle pressed together, lowing in distress. Eyes glowed in the darkness beyond the fence, amber coins floating in the black. 6 wolves circled the enclosure, testing for weakness, their lean bodies evidence of desperate hunger. "They don't usually come this close to settlements," Wyatt muttered, raising his rifle. "Must be starving." He fired once. The sharp crack echoed across the valley as the pack scattered, but didn't flee. Eliza waved her torch, shouting to frighten them further. The wolves paced just beyond the firelight, growling low in their throats. The largest, a silver-backed male, watched her with unnerving intelligence. "They're getting bolder," Wyatt warned. "Move closer to the—" Before he could finish, the silver wolf sprang, clearing the fence in a fluid arc, heading straight for Eliza. She stumbled backward, the torch falling as terror froze her limbs. Then Wyatt was there, tackling her sideways, both of them hitting the mud. The wolf snapped at empty air where her throat had been, his rifle discharged with deafening proximity, the bullet finding its mark. The wolf yelped and limped away, its pack retreating into the trees. For several heartbeats, they remained locked together, Wyatt's body sheltering hers, his breathing harsh against her hair. His hand pressed against her scarred shoulder, fingers tracing the raised tissue beneath her shirt. Eliza felt the moment of recognition dawned. His body tensed, his breathing suspended. When he spoke, his voice held a different kind of tension. "I know this scar," he said slowly. "From the blizzard, 2 years ago." She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, pinned as much by his realization as by his physical weight. "That can't be," she whispered, desperate to maintain her crumbling facade. "A crescent-shaped scar, right shoulder, frostbite damage." His fingers traced the exact outline with disturbing precision. "I tended this wound for 3 days." Before Eliza could respond, a distant sound cut through the night, church bells ringing frantically from town. "Fire," Wyatt said, instantly alert. He pulled away, offering her hand up. "That's the emergency signal." They rode hard toward Silver Creek, conversation forgotten in the urgency of the moment. As they crested the final hill, they saw flames engulfing the general store, orange light painting the night sky in hellish hues. The town had formed a bucket brigade from the well to the burning building, but the fire had too much of a head start. Moses directed efforts with military efficiency, his face streaked with soot. "What happened?" Wyatt asked, dismounting. "Started in the back storeroom," Moses replied, voice hoarse from smoke, "where the miners were meeting to discuss strike action." Eliza scanned the crowd, noting Walsh and several company men helping with the fire brigade, their actions more performative than effective. Walsh himself stood apart, watching the flames with an expression of grim satisfaction. Something about his profile, the set of his jaw, the slope of his shoulders, struck her as oddly familiar. She'd seen a similar stance before, in Wyatt's silhouette against the sunset. As Walsh stared into the flames, his composed expression slipped for just a moment. He pulled a small object from his pocket, a worn wooden carving of a horse, turning it once in his fingers before quickly returning it to its hiding place. The gesture seemed strangely intimate, at odds with the enforcer's ruthless reputation. When Luke drew the crying man in his dirt sketch, Eliza glanced back at Walsh. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the burning ruins, and something haunted flickered in his gaze before the cold mask returned. As she moved to join the bucket line, Abigail caught her arm, pulling her into the shadow of the livery stable. "This was deliberate," Abigail whispered, her face taut with fear and fury. "Marcus kept his records there, documented every unsafe condition, every threat, every bribe attempt." "Records about Blackwood mining?" Eliza asked. Abigail nodded. "He trusted Jonas, the store owner, to hide them. They were gathering evidence, planning to send it to federal authorities." Luke clung to his mother's skirts, eyes reflecting the distant flames. When he noticed Eliza, he reached for her hand, tugging her down to his level. With small fingers, he sketched in the dirt, a stick figure wearing a tall hat, standing over another figure on the ground. "What's he trying to say?" Eliza asked. Abigail's voice broke. "That's how he found his father. Under a man in a hat." Her eyes cut to Walsh. "That man." Luke's fingers trembled as he added to his drawing, something that looked like tears falling from the standing figure's face. "He says the man was crying," Abigail translated, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Luke's never mentioned that before." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air crept through Eliza. Her father's company, her inheritance, was built on blood and intimidation. How many Marcus Reeds lay buried for the crime of standing in Harrison Blackwood's way? By dawn, the fire had reduced the general store to smoldering ruins. The townsfolk dispersed, exhausted and demoralized. As Eliza helped load empty buckets into a wagon, she noticed Walsh toss something into the dying embers. A book or ledger, consumed in a brief flare of flames. Their eyes met across the glowing coals. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, quickly masked by cold indifference. He touched his hat in mocking salute before mounting his horse and riding toward the Blackwood mining office. "He remembers me from the train," Eliza murmured to herself. "What train?" Wyatt's voice behind her made her start. "Nothing," she said quickly, just thinking aloud. The ride back to the ranch passed in tense silence. The wolf attack, the momentary recognition, the interrupted confrontation, all hung between them like storm clouds gathering force. When they reached the cabin, a visitor awaited them. The silver-haired woman, Eleanor, sat primly on the porch steps. "You're not safe here anymore, Eliza," she said without preamble. Wyatt's head snapped toward Eliza, his expression hardening. "Eliza?" Eleanor rose, her movement surprisingly graceful for her age. "I believe the time for pretense has passed. Wouldn't you agree?" Inside the cabin, Eleanor revealed a secret Eliza had never anticipated. She unwound her scarf, revealing a face mapped with burn scars along the left side. Healed, but unmistakable. "Most people see the scars and look away," she said, tracing the damaged tissue with practiced fingers. "Few look close enough to recognize Catherine Stone beneath them." "Catherine Stone is dead," Wyatt said, but doubt colored his words. "That was the intention." Catherine's mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "The fire wasn't meant to kill me. That would have created a martyr. It was meant to destroy my research and credibility. A disfigured woman raving about corporate corruption becomes a pitiful lunatic, not a credible journalist." "How did you survive?" Eliza asked, transfixed by the revelation. Catherine's eyes grew distant. "I was working late in my apartment when the fire started. Someone had doused the hallway with kerosene. The flames spread so quickly, her fingers unconsciously touched the scarred side of her face. I escaped through a window, but not before the fire took its pound of flesh." "Why come here of all places?" Wyatt asked. "Silver Creek is the last place someone hiding from Blackwood should be." "Because this is where it began." Catherine moved to the window, gazing toward the mines in the distance. The first murders, the first land grabs. "I needed to understand how Harrison built his empire before I could expose it." She turned back to Eliza. "And because I promised your mother I would find the truth, I owed her that." "How did you and Wyatt meet?" Eliza asked, sensing there was more to their history than she knew. A warmth entered Catherine's damaged features. "Wyatt saved me once too. I was investigating unsafe conditions at the Northern Star Mine when a section collapsed. He pulled me out, then helped me document what I'd seen." "She was fearless," Wyatt added, something like grudging admiration in his voice. "Went places even the miners avoided. Made powerful enemies fast. Including my father," Eliza concluded. "Including your father," Catherine confirmed. "Though I didn't know then how far he would go to protect his interests." "My mother's letters mentioned you," Eliza said, struggling to reconcile this scarred woman with the vibrant journalist from the photograph. "Charlotte was my source inside Blackwood Mining," Catherine confirmed. "She discovered financial records showing bribes to officials, payoffs to thugs like Walsh, funds earmarked for problem resolution." Eliza swallowed hard. In her last letter, the unfinished one, she wrote that she had proof my father was involved in the fire. "I always thought she meant the one that supposedly killed you." Catherine shook her head. "She found evidence connecting Harrison directly to the deaths of miners who refused to sell their claims," she said gently, "including the first Marcus Reed in 1909, whose claim yielded the richest gold seam in the territory." "First Marcus Reed?" Wyatt interrupted. "Abigail's husband was named for his uncle, who made the original discovery," Catherine explained. "Harrison has been systematically eliminating the Reed family for a decade, trying to access that gold." Eliza's world tilted on its axis. The father who'd read her bedtime stories, who'd taught her to ride, who'd mourned her mother with quiet dignity, was a murderer many times over. "Why didn't you publish what you knew?" Wyatt demanded. "With what proof?" Catherine's scarred features twisted. "The fire destroyed everything. Charlotte's documents, my research, witness statements. All that remained was my word against the most powerful mining magnate in the country. She gestured to her face, and this ensured no one would take me seriously. She turned to Eliza, her gaze softening. When I heard Harrison's daughter had run away, I knew it wasn't coincidence. You found something, didn't you? Eliza nodded, retrieving her mother's unfinished letter from her bag. And this. She produced the leather folio of mining documents she'd taken from her father's study. Property deeds, financial records, correspondence about handling uncooperative claim owners. Catherine's hands trembled as she examined the papers. This is what we needed 10 years ago, proof of Harrison's direct involvement. It won't bring Mother back, Eliza said softly, emotion closing her throat as the reality of her mother's fate fully registered. No, Catherine agreed, briefly squeezing Eliza's hand, but it might save others from your father's ambition. These documents alone aren't enough, Catherine continued, after studying them more carefully. We need corroborating testimony from Abigail about Marcus, from miners who've witnessed threats, from Moses about patterns of intimidation. Moses? Wyatt questioned. He knows more than he admits, Catherine replied. His position as town elder gives him a unique perspective on Blackwood's activities over the years. A sound from the doorway drew their attention. Moses stood there, expression grave. Riders coming, two men asking after a young woman from Boston. Wyatt moved to the window, scanning the approaching horsemen. Bounty hunters, he confirmed grimly. Same ones who've been sniffing around town for days. He turned to Eliza, his face unreadable. Time for the truth, I think. The bounty hunters dismounted with the casual arrogance of men accustomed to intimidation. One tall and lean, the other stocky with a boxer's broken nose. Both carried visible sidearms and the hard eyes of men who valued human life primarily in dollars. Afternoon, the taller man said, touching his hat. We're looking for a missing woman. Young, dark hair, early 20s. Seen anyone like that? Wyatt leaned against the porch post, deliberately casual. Might have. What's the interest? Family concern, the man replied smoothly. Her father's mighty worried. Must be important, Wyatt observed, to send men like you so far. The bounty hunter smiled without warmth. $5,000 important. He withdrew a folded paper from his coat. Wyatt took it, unfolding it slowly. Eliza, watching from the cabin window, saw his face drain of color as he read the description that matched her exactly. And the name at the bottom, Eliza Blackwood, daughter of Boston industrialist Harrison Blackwood. The connection was made. Blackwood Mining. Blackwood's daughter. The woman who had lied to him since the moment she arrived. Haven't seen her, Wyatt said, returning the notice. But I'll keep an eye out. You do that. The bounty hunters remounted, the taller one pausing to add, we'll be checking back. 5,000 buys, a lot of ranch improvements. But when they disappeared down the trail, Wyatt returned to the cabin, the crumpled notice clutched in his fist. His eyes found Eliza immediately. Who are you, he demanded. She straightened her shoulders, no longer hiding. I think you already know. Say it. His voice was dangerously soft. Your real name. Eliza Blackwood. He staggered back as though she'd struck him. You lied to me, every day, every moment since you arrived. I had to, she began. Had to? Anger flashed in his eyes. Had to pretend to be a destitute orphan? Had to invade my home under false pretenses? Had to make a fool of me? That's not why I came, she protested. Then why? He threw the notice at her feet. Was this some rich girl's adventure? Slumming with the commoners before returning to your mansion? Because you saved my life, the words tore from her throat. 2 years ago in that blizzard, that was me. You pulled me from the snow. You kept me alive for 3 days. Wyatt froze, disbelief warring with dawning recognition. And my father took me away, she continued, her voice breaking. Called you trash and buried the story. Made sure you'd never be thanked or compensated. I couldn't tell you who I was because you would have seen me as a Blackwood, he finished, disgust evident. As the daughter of the man destroying this town, this valley, these people. I'm not my father, she whispered. No? His laugh held no humor. Then what are you doing here, Eliza Blackwood? Spying for Daddy? Checking his investments? I came to find the truth about my mother's death, she said, and about Catherine Stone. Convenient that you found both. He shook his head. I don't know what game you're playing, but I want no part of it. It's not a game. She moved toward him, but he stepped back. Everything Catherine told you is true. My father is responsible for— Get out! The words fell like stones between them. Wyatt, get out! He pointed toward the door. Go back to your mansion, back to your father, back to whatever life you thought you could escape when playing at being poor. Tears blurred her vision. That's not why I came. I don't care why you came. He turned away. You lied. That's all I need to know. Catherine tried to intervene. Wyatt, she's in danger. If Harrison finds her— Not my concern, he cut her off. She made her bed. Let her lie in it. He walked into his bedroom and closed the door with quiet finality. Eliza stood in the cabin's main room, shaking with silent sobs. Catherine placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Give him time, she said softly. The wounds run deeper than you know. He hates me, Eliza whispered. He's hurt, Catherine corrected, and scared. Wyatt Sullivan has lost everyone he ever loved. Trusting comes hard to him now. Moses, who had witnessed the confrontation in silence, finally spoke. My son works for your father in Boston, he said, his voice heavy with an old shame. That's how I know they're looking for you. Your son? Eliza looked up, surprised. Thomas Harrington, assistant to the Eastern Operations Manager. Moses sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. He was ambitious, wanted more than Silver Creek could offer. Harrison gave him that chance. So you've been feeding information to my father? Eliza asked, her sense of betrayal deepening. Moses shook his head. No, Thomas writes occasionally, tells me bits of company business to impress me. Last letter mentioned the boss's daughter had disappeared. Said there was chaos in the Boston office. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm torn between loyalty to my son and to this town. He met her eyes directly. If I help you expose Harrison Blackwood, I destroy my son's career. Maybe worse. And if you don't, Catherine asked quietly, then more Marcus Reeds disappear. Moses's weathered hands curled into fists. More families like the Sullivans lose everything. Eliza wiped her tears, straightening her spine with inherited Blackwood resolve. I'm not leaving. The bounty hunters will return, Catherine warned. Let them. Determination replaced despair. I've spent my entire life being moved like a chess piece for my father's ambitions. I won't run anymore. That night, as rain pattered against the barn roof, Eliza made her decision. If Wyatt wanted her gone, she would have to make herself indispensable. She would earn her place through actions, not words or birth. Dawn found her repairing fence posts in the western pasture. Hands blistered anew as she worked through a steady drizzle. When Wyatt emerged from the cabin and saw her, his face registered surprise quickly masked by indifference. He said nothing, turning back inside. Inside his bedroom, Wyatt stood at the small window watching Eliza work. Her determination both frustrated and impressed him. The rain plastered her shirt to her shoulders, revealing the slender frame that had nonetheless split cord after cord of wood, hauled water, mended fences, all without complaint. His eyes fell on a small chest tucked beneath his bed. It had been months since he'd opened it, the memories too painful to revisit. But today, something compelled him to kneel, dust off the lid, and lift it. Rebecca's journal lay inside, wrapped in the shawl she'd worn on their wedding day. The leather was worn soft at the corners from her daily handling. Wyatt traced the cover, remembering how she'd write each evening by lamplight, capturing the day's events in her neat, practical hand. He opened to the final entries, dated the week before her death. Fever worse today. Sent word to town for medicine, but the snow makes travel difficult. Not worried yet. This old farm girl has weathered worse. Wyatt insists on staying, but I've convinced him to check the trap lines. We need the income, and hovering won't make me heal faster. Stubborn man would starve us both out of devotion if I let him. The last entry, written in shakier script, if I go, don't let guilt keep you from living again. Let someone in. Promise me, James Wyatt Sullivan. Promise me you won't lock your heart away with my body. Remember what I told you when we met. A good knot holds when everything else fails. Our love was the strongest knot, But now you must tie new ones, create new connections. That's how we survive in this world, by binding ourselves to others. I release you from your promises to me. Make new ones. All my love, always, Rebecca. Wyatt closed the journal, a single tear tracking down his weathered cheek. I never promised, he whispered to the empty room. I never promised I'd let anyone else in. But he had promised to honor Rebecca's wishes, and she had asked for his happiness, not his fidelity to grief. Outside, Eliza continued working through the rain, each hammer stroke an argument for her place at the ranch, each repair a silent plea for trust. The following days established a new pattern. Eliza worked from sunrise to sunset, tackling the hardest task without complaint. She fixed the broken wagon wheel, patched holes in the barn roof, and even began completing the cabin addition Wyatt had abandoned after Rebecca died. Each morning she hammered boards into place. Each evening she mended harness by lantern light. She didn't speak to him. He didn't speak to her. But she felt his eyes watching from the cabin window, torn between fury and something less definable. On the third evening, as the spring rain turned gentle, Eliza sat on the porch steps, too exhausted to retreat to the barn immediately. Wyatt emerged from the cabin, two steaming mugs in hand. Without a word, he offered one to her, then settled on the opposite end of the steps. They sat in silence, watching mist rise from the rain-soaked earth. The valley spread before them, painted in watercolor hues of green and gray as daylight faded. My mother taught me to ride before I could properly walk, Eliza said finally, breaking the days-long silence. She grew up on a farm in Vermont before she met my father. Said a woman should always have a way to leave if she needed to. Wyatt didn't respond immediately, but he didn't leave either. Rebecca said something similar, he eventually offered. She was a shepherd's daughter from Montana, could outride me any day of the week. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Smarter than me by half, too. The mention of Rebecca created a bridge of understanding between them. Both had loved and lost. Both carried ghosts. I found her journal, Eliza admitted, in the chest. I shouldn't have read it, but Mom, instead of anger, Wyatt's face showed resignation. What did it say? That you shouldn't lock your heart away. That you should make new promises. He looked away toward the distant mountains. Easier said than done. She must have been remarkable, Eliza ventured. She was. His voice softened with memory, practical as sunrise and twice as bright. Never understood why she chose me. I can, Eliza said quietly, then flushed at her own boldness. Wyatt studied her for a long moment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time since learning her identity. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Moses arrived with troubling news. Walsh is organizing a search party, he reported. Says he has information the Blackwood girl, Buffalo, is being held at a local ranch against her will. Wyatt's jaw tightened. She's not being held. She refuses to leave. Moses glanced toward the barn where Eliza worked. That distinction won't matter to the Sheriff Walsh brought in from the next county. Man's been in Blackwood's pocket for years. What do you suggest? Wyatt asked, weariness evident in his voice. Send her away, Moses said bluntly, before this turns ugly. I've tried. Wyatt ran a hand through his hair. She's stubborn. Like her mother, Catherine murmured, joining them on the porch. Charlotte had the same determination when she believed in something. Moses studied Catherine with narrowed eyes. You're familiar with the Blackwoods. More than most, she replied, touching her scarred face. Harrison Blackwood gave me these as a parting gift when I investigated his business practices. Understanding dawned in Moses's weathered face. Catherine Stone, the journalist. She inclined her head. What remains of her? We all thought you died in that fire. That was the intention. She turned to Wyatt, which is why you can't let them take Eliza. Harrison doesn't allow loose ends. What am I supposed to do? Wyatt demanded. Take on Walsh, the sheriff, and Blackwood's bounty hunter single-handed? Not single-handed, Moses said quietly. The miners have had enough. This could be the spark that finally unites them against Blackwood's tyranny. He hesitated, then added, There's something else you should know about Walsh. Something I've kept to myself too long. Wyatt's eyes narrowed. What about him? He's your half-brother, Moses said quietly. Same father, different mother. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the rain seemed to pause. That's impossible, Wyatt finally managed. My father had no other children. Your father abandoned a pregnant woman in Denver before he met your mother, Moses explained. She died in childbirth. The boy, Daniel, grew up in an orphanage, took his mother's name, Walsh. How do you know this? Wyatt's voice was barely above a whisper. I served with your father in the war, Moses replied. He told me everything when the consumption was taking him. Asked me to look after his boys. Both of them. I failed in that. Does Walsh know? He's known since he was 16. Tracked down his father only to find him already dead and a new family in his place. Moses's eyes held deep regret. The boy had nothing but his mother's name and a lifetime of anger. Harrison Blackwood found him, recognized that anger as useful. That's why he hates you so much, Eliza realized. You received the love and recognition he never did. Wyatt's world, like Eliza's, was reshaping itself around painful truths. The enemy who had threatened his livelihood, intimidated his neighbors, possibly even contributed to Rebecca's death by delaying the doctor, was his own blood. The following day brought unexpected clarity. While Eliza worked on the cabin addition, hammering shingles into place with grim determination, Wyatt approached for the first time since discovering her identity. Why are you still here? He asked. No anger in his voice now, only genuine confusion. Eliza paused, wiping sweat from her brow. Because I gave my word. I said I would work to earn my place, and I meant it. You don't need to prove anything to me. Yes, I do. She met his gaze squarely. I lied about my name, but everything else was true, including why I came. Which was? To find the man who saw me as a person, not a possession or a pawn. She resumed hammering, each strike punctuating her words. The only man who ever helped me without wanting something in return. Wyatt watched her work, something shifting in his expression. You're good with your hands for an heiress. Mother taught me practical skills before she died, Eliza said. She grew up on a small farm before meeting my father. Said a woman should never be helpless. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Rebecca said something similar. She was a shepherd's daughter before we met. Smarter than me by half. They fell silent, the mention of Rebecca creating a bridge of shared understanding. Both had loved and lost. Both carried ghosts. Before Eliza could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Walsh rode at the head of a group, including the sheriff and the two bounty hunters from before. Stay inside, Wyatt ordered, moving to intercept them. No. Eliza climbed down from the roof. I'm done hiding. Walsh dismounted with fluid grace, his cold eyes taking in the scene with calculating precision. Now that she knew, Eliza could see the resemblance to Wyatt, something in the set of the jaw, the way he carried himself. Sullivan, Walsh nodded curtly. We need to search your property. On what grounds? Wyatt demanded. We have reason to believe Eliza Blackwood is being held here, the sheriff interjected, possibly against her will. Wyatt's blood ran cold. If they took Eliza, she would be dragged back to Boston, locked away, lost forever. And despite everything, the lies, the betrayal, he couldn't let that happen. She's not here, he said, positioning himself between the men and the cabin. Then you won't mind if we look. Walsh's hand moved casually toward his holstered pistol. Wyatt stood his ground. I do mind. The tension crackled between them, a spark away from violence. Then Eliza emerged from behind the cabin, hammer still in hand, covered in sawdust and determination. I'm here, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Eliza, don't, Wyatt warned. I won't let you lie for me. She faced the sheriff directly. I am Eliza Blackwood, but I'm not being held against my will, and I'm not going back. The taller bounty hunter smiled coldly. That's not your choice, Miss Blackwood. Yes, it is. She set down the hammer. I'm of legal age. I've broken no laws. You cannot force me. The sheriff hesitated, glancing at Walsh. Your father has no legal claim on me, she interrupted. I renounce my inheritance. I renounce my name. This is my home now. Walsh's expression darkened. This isn't a game, Miss Blackwood. Your father is not a man who accepts defiance. Neither am I, she replied, lifting her chin with inherited Blackwood pride. A tense silence followed. Then, to everyone's surprise, Wyatt stepped beside her. "She stays," he said simply. Walsh's eyes narrowed, moving between them with dawning comprehension. "You're harboring a fugitive. I'm protecting a free woman who's made her choice." Wyatt's voice held iron certainty. "Unless you have legal grounds to take her, you're trespassing on my property." And the sheriff, caught between duty and the clear determination of the two people before him, finally nodded reluctantly. "There's no law says we can take her against her will if she's of age." He turned to Walsh. "We need better grounds than a father's concern." Walsh cursed but mounted his horse. "This isn't over, Sullivan." His cold gaze shifted to Eliza. "Your father will hear about this, Miss Blackwood." "Good," she said evenly. "Tell him I know everything about Mother and Catherine Stone. Tell him I have proof." Something flickered in Walsh's eyes, the first hint of uncertainty. He wheeled his horse around, leading the party back toward town. When the dust settled, Eliza turned to Wyatt, emotion thickening her voice. "Thank you." He didn't smile, but the hardness had left his eyes. "You should have told me the truth from the beginning." "I know." She looked at the cabin's completed edition, the work she'd done alone. "You couldn't finish it, so I did." Something broke in his expression, the dam holding back a flood of emotions he'd kept contained for too long. "Why?" he asked, the single word containing volumes. "Because you saved my life," she said simply, "and I'm trying to save yours." He reached for her hand. She took it. They stood there, muddied and exhausted, as spring rain began to fall, washing the ground clean. That evening, Catherine shared her plan to expose Harrison Blackwood's crimes. "These documents," she said, indicating the folio Eliza had stolen, "combined with testimonies from the miners and Abigail Reed, create a compelling case. But we need to ensure copies reach the proper authorities before Harrison realizes what we have. The U.S. Marshal in the territorial capital would be our best ally," Moses suggested. "He's one of the few officials not on Blackwood's payroll, but getting there won't be easy, especially now that they know where to find you." "We need to make multiple copies," Catherine insisted. "Hide them in different locations. If one set is discovered, others will survive." Using the last of Moses's writing paper and carbon sheets, they painstakingly duplicated the most damning documents. Catherine organized them with journalist precision, adding explanatory notes to connect the evidence. "Even with these records, it's a dangerous gamble," Moses warned. "Harrison Blackwood has friends in the territorial government, judges, lawmakers." "But not all of them," Catherine countered. "There are still honest men in power who would be appalled by these crimes." "He already knows I have something," Eliza pointed out. "That's why Walsh was so unsettled when I mentioned proof." "Which means we need to move quickly," Wyatt concluded, "before he sends more than bounty hunters." Moses arrived with news that confirmed their fears. "Walsh is gathering men, 20, maybe more. They're saying Wyatt kidnapped the Blackwood girl, holding her for ransom." "That's absurd," Eliza protested. "Doesn't matter," Moses said grimly. "It's the excuse they need to come in force." As they discussed options, a knock at the door silenced them. Wyatt reached for his rifle, but it was only Abigail and Luke, their faces drawn with fear. "Company men searched our house," Abigail reported, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "Tore everything apart looking for Marcus's papers." Luke clung to his mother, eyes wide with remembered terror. When he saw Eliza, he broke away, running to hug her fiercely. "They're coming for you next," Abigail warned. "The whole town's talking about it." "How much time do we have?" Catherine asked. "Dawn, maybe." Abigail hugged herself. "They're drinking now, working up courage." Wyatt made a decision. "We leave tonight, all of us. Head for the territorial capital where there's a federal marshal not on Blackwood's payroll." "My house has a root cellar," Moses offered. "Hidden entrance. You can shelter there while I arrange transportation." As they prepared to depart, the spring rain intensified, drumming against the cabin roof with growing force. Eliza paused in gathering Catherine's documents, watching water pool in the yard. "The creek will be rising," she observed. "Could make crossing difficult." "We'll manage," Wyatt assured her, checking his rifle. "There's a high crossing 2 miles upstream." But Eliza's concern proved prescient. By the time they reached Moses's house on the outskirts of town, the rain had become a deluge. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that shook the windows in their frames. Moses ushered them inside, his lined face grave. Creek's already over its banks. Road to the capital will be impassable by morning. Catherine spread the documents on Moses's table, organizing them with journalist precision. We need to make copies, she decided. Hide them in multiple locations in case Walsh finds us. While they worked, Eliza noticed Luke staring out the window, transfixed by something in the distance. "What is it?" she asked, joining him. The boy pointed toward the hills, where the Silver Creek Dam controlled water flow to the mining operations. Lightning illuminated a scene of growing danger, water spilling over the dam's edge, eroding the earthen barrier. "The dam," she breathed. "It's failing." Moses confirmed her fear with a single glance. "If it breaks, half the town will be underwater within minutes." Church bells began to ring, the same emergency signal they had heard during the fire, but now with greater urgency. Lanterns moved through town as people emerged into the downpour, alerted to the danger. "We should help," Eliza said, already moving toward the door. "That's exactly what Walsh wants," Catherine cautioned, "to draw you out." "People could die," Eliza insisted. "My father's company built that dam. This is partly my responsibility." Wyatt studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll help, but we stay together. First sign of trouble, we retreat." They made their way toward the dam, joining townspeople already working to reinforce the weakening structure with sandbags. Water roared through the spillway, brown and angry with debris. Walsh and his men watched from horseback, making no move to assist. "Let it go," he called to the struggling workers. "Blackwood will rebuild, better than before." "After you buy the flooded land for pennies," Moses retorted, passing filled sandbags to Wyatt. The floodwaters continued to rise, lapping at the top of the dam. Each new wave threatened to overtop the barrier, which would accelerate its collapse. Abigail screamed suddenly, pointing downstream. "Luke! Luke!" The boy had wandered away, now standing on a rock outcropping by the creek's edge. The ground beneath him was visibly crumbling as water undercut the bank. Without hesitation, Eliza ran toward him, her heart in her throat. "Luke, don't move!" She reached him just as the outcropping began to collapse, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. But the momentum carried them both toward the churning water as the ground gave way. They plunged into the icy current, the force of it stealing Eliza's breath. She clung to Luke with one arm. Desperate to keep his head above water, the flood carried them downstream. Through water-blurred vision, she saw Wyatt diving in after them, powerful strokes bringing him alongside. He caught them against a half-submerged tree, the three of them clinging to branches as the torrent raged around them. "Hold on to me," he shouted over the roar. "I'll get us to shore." But before they could move, a new danger appeared. Walsh, standing on the bank, watching their struggle with cold calculation. The dam was minutes from collapse, and they were trapped in the path of destruction. To everyone's shock, Walsh stripped off his coat and plunged into the flood, fighting his way toward them. He reached their temporary haven, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. "Give me the boy," he ordered. "So you can let us drown?" Wyatt challenged. "Damn you, Sullivan," Walsh growled. "Give me the boy before we all die." Something in his voice convinced Eliza. She helped Luke toward Walsh, who secured the child with surprising gentleness. "Take my hand," he said to Eliza. She hesitated, then grasped his outstretched palm. Together, the four of them formed a human chain, Walsh using his superior height and strength to anchor them as they fought toward shore. They collapsed on the muddy bank as Abigail ran toward them, gathering Luke into desperate arms. The child coughed, expelling creek water, then looked up at Walsh with puzzling recognition. "Why?" Wyatt asked, still gasping for breath. Walsh wouldn't meet his eyes. "We're brothers," he said quietly. "Brothers?" Eliza echoed, confusion mixing with exhaustion. Walsh's gaze moved between them, something raw and unguarded in his expression. "James Sullivan was my father too. Left my mother before I was born." His voice tightened. "When I found out, I came looking for what should have been mine. Found you instead, the son he chose to acknowledge." "You've been trying to destroy me for years," Wyatt said, disbelief mingling with dawning comprehension. "I wanted to," Walsh admitted, his usual composure fracturing. "Hated you for having what I never did. But watching you these past days, risking everything for her, for the pum," he looked away toward the rising water. Perhaps we're both our father's sons after all. Without another word, he turned and walked away, shoulders rigid against the weight of a lifetime of resentment beginning to crack. But there was no time for further explanation. A sound like thunder, but continuous, growing, filled the valley. The dam had breached. "Run!" Moses shouted from the higher ground. "To the church hill!" They scrambled upward as a wall of water surged through the valley, sweeping away everything in its path. From their vantage point on the church steps, they watched in horror as floodwaters consumed the lower streets of Silver Creek. In the chaos of water and destruction, Walsh had disappeared. But his parting words hung in the air, a revelation that would change everything. Brothers, Walsh and Wyatt Sullivan, enemies connected by blood neither had acknowledged. As dawn broke over the flooded valley, Eliza realized the truth had been unleashed like the waters themselves. Unstoppable, transformative, destroying the old to make way for something new. Morning revealed Silver Creek transformed. The floodwaters had receded slightly, leaving behind a landscape of mud, debris, and destruction. From the church hill, Eliza surveyed the damage with a heavy heart. The lower street, where the general store had already burned, was now a swamp of silt and wreckage. Houses stood waterlogged in, some tilting dangerously on undermined foundations. Yet amid devastation, she witnessed resilience. Townsfolk moved purposefully through the muck, salvaging what could be saved, checking on neighbors, beginning the long process of rebuilding. Not as individuals, but as a community bound by common struggle. "Your father's company built that dam," Moses said, joining her on the church steps. "Cut corners on materials, ignored safety recommendations. We all knew it wouldn't last." "How many dams like that has he built?" Eliza asked, her voice hollow. "Too many," Moses replied, "though this is the first to fail so spectacularly." Dawn of April 15th revealed a landscape transformed. The rain had finally stopped after 3 days of relentless downpour. Muddy water still covered much of the lower valley, but the worst of the flooding had receded. Baby, Thêm đoàn thời gian trong hành trình to Harper's Junction. Selco dawn brought renewed determination. According to Walsh, they could reach Harper's Junction by nightfall if they maintained a steady pace. April 16th. If they could reach the town by that evening, there would be just enough time to intercept the weekly federal mail train that departed at midnight. Catherine and Thomas would need 3 more days to arrive by the eastern route once it dried enough for travel. The church had become a makeshift shelter. Inside, families who had lost their homes huddled on pews, sharing blankets and what food could be found. Catherine worked alongside the minister's wife, tending to minor injuries. Abigail sat with Luke in her lap, the boy finally sleeping after the terror of the previous night. Wyatt entered through the church's double doors, rain-soaked and mud-splattered. He'd been helping recover livestock swept away by the flood. His eyes found Eliza immediately, a silent communication passing between them before he approached. "Walsh is back," he said quietly, "with reinforcements." "How many?" Eliza asked. 15, maybe 20 men, armed. He ran a hand through his wet hair. "They've set up at the mining office, only building on high ground with space for that many." "What does he want?" "You," Wyatt's voice hardened, "and the documents." Catherine joined them, her scarred face grim. "They know we have evidence. They'll do anything to recover or destroy it." "We need to get to the territorial capital," Moses insisted. "The marshal there?" "We're not going anywhere," Wyatt interrupted, gesturing toward the window. "The roads are washed out. We're trapped here, same as Walsh." A heavy silence settled over the group as the implications became clear. They were cornered in a half-destroyed town, outnumbered and outgunned, with no way to summon help. "There's another way," Eliza said suddenly. "By river." "The river is a raging torrent right now," Moses protested. "Exactly." Her eyes lit with determination. "No one would expect us to attempt it, and once we're past the Narrows, it's a straight run to Cooperton, where we can catch the train to the capital." "It's suicide," Wyatt argued, but something in his expression suggested he was considering the possibility. "I grew up boating on the Charles River," Eliza countered, "and you know these waters better than anyone." "It might work," Catherine said thoughtfully. "Walsh will expect us to wait for the roads to dry, or to try escaping over the eastern pass. He won't watch the river. If, and that's a substantial if, we had a boat, Wyatt pointed out. Moses cleared his throat. Old Peterson, who drowned last spring, had a flat-bottomed riverboat, sturdy oak construction. His widow keeps it behind their place on the north end. It would take at least 2 people to handle it in these conditions, Wyatt mused. 3, Eliza corrected. You, me, and Catherine. Moses needs to stay here with Abigail and Luke. Catherine shook her head. I'm too old for river running, and someone needs to carry the documents. Someone they won't suspect. She turned to Moses. How loyal is your son to Harrison Blackwood? Moses's weathered face creased in thought. Thomas is ambitious, not evil. If he knew what Blackwood was really doing. Can you get a message to him? Catherine pressed. He's in Boston, hundreds of miles away. Not anymore, came a voice from the church doorway. They turned to see a well-dressed young man in his 30s, the image of Moses but with smoother skin and fewer burdens evident in his bearing. Thomas, Moses said, surprise and wariness mingling in his voice. What are you doing here? Walsh telegraphed Boston when Miss Blackwood was located. Thomas Harrington removed his hat, revealing the same steel-gray hair as his father, though without the silver dominance. Mr. Blackwood sent me to ensure his daughter's safe return. Eliza stepped forward. And now that you've found me? Thomas studied her with shrewd eyes. That depends on whether what my father has been telling me is true. He reached into his coat, withdrawing a folded paper. He says Blackwood Mining has been eliminating obstacles, human obstacles, on your father's direct orders. It's true, Eliza confirmed without hesitation. We have documentation, financial records, correspondence, witnesses. Show me, Thomas demanded. Catherine hesitated, but Eliza nodded her approval. They led Thomas to a small anteroom where their evidence was hidden beneath a loose floorboard. As he examined the documents, his face grew increasingly grave. These payments, he said, indicating a ledger entry, I authorized these myself, believing they were for land acquisition. Not for, his voice faltered. Murder, Catherine supplied bluntly. Coercion. Destruction of evidence. Thomas sat heavily on a wooden chair, the papers trembling in his hands. I've been complicit in this, all these years. You didn't know, Moses said gently. I should have questioned more. Asked why certain claims were prioritized, why certain problems disappeared so conveniently. He looked up, a new resolve hardening his features. What do you need from me? Safe passage to the territorial capital, Eliza answered, and your testimony about these financial transactions. Thomas nodded slowly. Walsh trusts me. I can create a distraction, give you time to reach the river. He hesitated. But there's something you should know about Walsh. Something important. That he's my half-brother? Wyatt interjected. Moses told me. More than that, Thomas leaned forward. Walsh isn't just Harrison Blackwood's enforcer. He's been embezzling from the company for years, skimming from these same special project funds. Blackwood knows but keeps him on a leash with that knowledge. Why would my father tolerate theft? Eliza asked, confused. Because Walsh is effective at the dirty work Blackwood requires, and because keeping secrets creates loyalty, of a sort. Thomas's mouth twisted. There's more. Walsh has been pursuing his own agenda regarding the Reed property. What agenda? Wyatt demanded. The gold vein that runs through their claim extends much farther than Blackwood realizes. Walsh has been buying adjacent properties under various names, planning to eventually control the entire seam. Including my land, Wyatt said, comprehension dawning. That's why he's been so determined to force me out. Exactly, Thomas nodded. He's been playing both sides, carrying out Blackwood's orders while building his own empire. This revelation cast Walsh in a new light, not merely a brutal enforcer, but a calculating strategist with his own ambitions. A man with everything to lose if his schemes were exposed. Does he know you're here? Catherine asked. He knows I arrived from Boston, Thomas replied. Not that I've found you, he believes I'm checking the company office for damage. A plan began to form. Thomas would return to Walsh, reporting that the floodwaters had destroyed essential company records. While Walsh focused on retrieving these supposed documents, Eliza, Wyatt, and Catherine would make their escape via the river. As dusk approached, they prepared for departure. Moses would remain behind with Abigail and Luke, then follow by road once conditions improved, bringing additional evidence gathered from townspeople. "I'm entrusting you with our best chance for justice," Eliza told Thomas as she handed him copies of the most damning documents. "If we don't make it—" "You will," he interrupted. "I'll make certain of it." The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle as they slipped away from the church. Keeping to shadows and alleyways, they made their way to the Peterson widows' property. The flatboat was where Moses had described, partially sheltered beneath a lean-to, its solid oak construction promising durability in the treacherous waters. "It's bigger than I expected," Eliza whispered as they dragged it toward the swollen river. "Can the two of us manage it?" "We'll find out," Wyatt replied grimly. Catherine embraced them both. "I'll leave for the capital as soon as the eastern road clears. If all goes well, we'll meet at Federal Hall within 3 days." "And if we don't arrive?" Eliza asked. "Then I'll ensure Harrison Blackwood's crimes are known to the world," Catherine promised. "One way or another, he will answer for Charlotte's death." With final whispered farewells, Eliza and Wyatt pushed the boat into the rushing current, jumping aboard as it was caught by the flow. The river immediately seized them, hurtling the craft downstream with alarming speed. Wyatt manned the stern sweep, a long oar that functioned as a rudder, while Eliza used a shorter paddle to fend off debris. The night closed around them, clouds obscuring moon and stars. Only occasional flashes of lightning illuminated their path, revealing the churning waters and hazards ahead. They worked in near-silent coordination, communicating through touch and gesture when the river's roar overwhelmed speech. Eliza felt strangely alive, every sense heightened by danger and proximity. Each successfully navigated obstacle, each moment of synchronized effort with Wyatt, strengthened the connection growing between them, a bond forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. As they approached the Narrows, a quarter-mile stretch where the river squeezed between rocky cliffs, a different light appeared on the bank behind them. Lanterns, moving with purpose. "Walsh," Wyatt confirmed, voice tight. Thomas's distraction didn't work. The pursuers had brought horses, following the river road that paralleled the water's course. Soon shots rang out, bullets spitting into the water around their craft. "Get down," Wyatt ordered, pulling Eliza toward the boat's center. "We can't navigate from here," she protested. "Better lost than dead." He covered her body with his own as another volley peppered their vessel. The boat, now unguided, spun wildly in the current. They hurtled into the Narrows, rock walls closing in on both sides. The roar became deafening as the river compressed, its force multiplied by confinement. A massive log appeared in their path, lodged between boulders. The boat struck it broadside, the impact nearly capsizing them. Water poured over the gunwale as Wyatt lunged for the sweep, fighting to regain control. "We're taking on water!" Eliza shouted, bailing frantically with her hat. "We won't make it to Cooperton," he called back. "We need to land as soon as possible." The Narrows ended in a churning cauldron, where the river briefly widened before constricting again. Using all his strength, Wyatt angled their damaged craft toward a small cove on the eastern bank. They struck land hard, the boat's bottom scraping over gravel. Eliza leapt out, securing the bow line to a half-submerged tree while Wyatt dragged their supplies ashore. Behind them, lanterns continued their pursuit along the river road. "They'll realize we've landed," Eliza said, catching her breath. "We need to keep moving." Wyatt oriented himself by the distant mountains, just visible as darker shapes against the night sky. "There's an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles east. Might give us shelter till morning." They abandoned the crippled boat and plunged into the forest, the saturated ground sucking at their boots with each step. The rain had intensified again, dripping from leaves and branches, soaking them to the skin despite their oilcloth coats. Wyatt led the way, his knowledge of the terrain unerring even in darkness. Occasionally he reached back, his hand finding hers when the path grew treacherous or steep. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was little more than a shack, its roof partially collapsed, door hanging from a single hinge. Still, it offered some protection from the elements, and the stone fireplace remained intact. "We can't risk a fire," Wyatt said, surveying their meager shelter. "Smoke would lead them straight to us." Eliza nodded, shivering as she wrung water from her hair. "How far to Cooperton from here?" 15 miles by road, more cross-country." He emptied his pack, assessing their supplies. "We have food for maybe 2 days, 1 canteen of water." "And the documents?" He patted his inner coat where Catherine's carefully waterproof package rested. Safe and dry, unlike the rest of us. Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed Eliza. The night's terror, the physical exertion, the constant tension of the past weeks, all crashed upon her at once. She sank onto a rough bench, her limbs leaden. Wyatt noticed immediately, concern replacing practicality. You need rest. He removed his coat, still somewhat dry on the inside, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Sleep if you can, I'll keep watch. You need rest too, she protested. I'll maybe wake you in a few hours. He moved to the doorway, rifle cradled in his arms, silhouetted against the lighter darkness outside. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Eliza found herself studying Wyatt's profile, marveling at how this man, whom she had deceived and hurt, continued to protect her, to put her safety above his own. Why did you really come looking for me? He asked suddenly, his voice soft in the darkness. The truth this time? The question caught her off guard, but she sensed its importance. This man deserved honesty after all the lies. When you pulled me from that blizzard, she began slowly, you were the first person who ever helped me without knowing who I was, without wanting something from the Blackwood name or fortune. You treated me as a human being with inherent value. She paused, gathering courage. I needed to know if that person was real or if I'd imagined him in my fever. And now? His voice remained neutral, but she sensed tension beneath the words. Now I know he's real. She met his gaze across the shadowed cabin, more real than anything in Boston ever was. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. You should sleep, he finally said, turning back to his vigil. But something had shifted in his posture, a rigid guardedness giving way to something more yielding. Dawn brought watery sunlight and new dangers. From the cabin's single window, they spotted riders on the distant ridge, Walsh's men, methodically searching the area. They're cutting off the route to Cooperton, Wyatt observed. We need a different plan. Eliza joined him at the window. What about following the river further downstream? Eventually it reaches Harper's Junction. That's 30 miles through rough country. He glanced at her doubtfully. Not an easy journey, especially with men hunting us. I'm stronger than I look, she reminded him, and more stubborn than most. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. That you are. They set out as soon as the search party moved to the next ridge, keeping to the densest forest where their passage would leave minimal traces. The rain had stopped, but water dripped constantly from the saturated canopy, and their clothing never fully dried. By midday, they had covered perhaps 5 miles, harder going than either had anticipated due to fallen trees, washouts, and the need to frequently backtrack to avoid detection. We need to rest, Wyatt finally conceded when Eliza stumbled for the third time. Just for an hour. They found shelter beneath a rocky overhang, sharing the last of their jerky. Eliza's city-bred body ached in places she hadn't known could hurt, but she refused to complain. Every mile increased their chances of reaching help and of exposing her father's crimes. Tell me about her, she said suddenly. Rebecca. Wyatt looked startled, then thoughtful. She was practical. Never wasted words or effort. Could drop a deer at 300 yards and stitch the finest seams you ever saw. A genuine smile softened his features. Had no patience for foolishness, but endless patience for creatures in need. Found me half dead from a mine collapse. Nursed me back same as I did for you in that blizzard. You loved her very much. She saved me in every way a person can be saved. His eyes held a distance that spoke of cherished memory rather than fresh grief. When she died, I thought that was it for me. No more chances, no more connection. He looked at Eliza directly. I was wrong. The simple admission hung in the air between them, profound in its implications. Before Eliza could respond, a twig snapped nearby, too heavy to be wildlife. Wyatt signaled for silence, reaching slowly for his rifle. They froze, barely breathing, as footsteps approached their hiding place. I know you're there, Sullivan. Walsh's voice carried clearly through the trees. No need to make this harder than it has to be. Wyatt's jaw tightened, but he remained still. I'm alone, Walsh continued. Just want to talk. 5 minutes, then you can shoot me if you want. Eliza and Wyatt exchanged glances. It could be a trap, likely was, but Walsh's tone lacked its usual cold authority. "Step into the clearing," Wyatt called. "Hands where I can see them." Walsh appeared between two pines, palms raised to shoulder height. He wore no sidearm, though a knife remained sheathed at his belt. His normally immaculate appearance had suffered from the same conditions plaguing them. Mud-spattered clothing, unshaven face, eyes shadowed by exhaustion. "How did you find us?" Wyatt demanded, rifle aimed center mass. "Wasn't hard. You're leaving tracks a blind man could follow." Walsh made no move to come closer. City girl's not used to covering her trail. "What do you want?" Eliza asked, stepping partially behind Wyatt. "To offer a deal." Walsh lowered his hand slightly. "The documents for your freedom." Wyatt's laugh was humorless. "Why would we trust you?" "Because Harrison Blackwood arrives tomorrow on the morning train." Walsh's expression hardened. "And he's bringing 20 Pinkertons with him. Professional manhunters, not local muscle. You won't escape them." Eliza felt cold despite the day's growing warmth. "My father is coming here? Personally? Seems his wayward daughter and some stolen property are worth the journey." Walsh's eyes narrowed. "He's not pleased with my handling of the situation." "So this is about saving your own skin," Wyatt concluded. "Partly," Walsh admitted with unexpected candor. "But there's more at stake. Blackwood's planning to level what remains of Silver Creek, claim the entire valley for a new mining operation. Hundreds will lose their homes, their livelihoods." "Since when do you care about the townsfolk?" Wyatt challenged. Something like shame flashed across Walsh's face. "I've done things I'm not proud of. Following orders, building my own position. But this?" He shook his head. "This goes beyond business." "You expect us to believe you've suddenly developed a conscience?" Eliza asked skeptically. "Believe what you want. But know this, if Harrison Blackwood gets those documents, everyone connected to them dies. You, Stone, the old man, even the Reed woman and her boy." Walsh's gaze locked with Wyatt's. "I've carried out Blackwood's dirty work for years. I know how he operates." Wyatt's rifle hadn't wavered. "Why are you really here, Daniel?" The use of his first name visibly startled Walsh. For a moment, his carefully constructed facade slipped, revealing something raw and unexpectedly vulnerable. "Moses told you," he said quietly. "That we're half-brothers?" "Yes." Wyatt's voice remained neutral, though I find it hard to reconcile with the man who's been trying to destroy me for years. "I wanted what should have been mine," Walsh admitted. "The name, the land, the father who chose your mother over mine." Bitterness edged his words, then faded. "But watching you risk your life for the boy yesterday, it reminded me there are things that matter more than old grievances." An uneasy silence fell. Eliza studied the two men, so different in manner and path, yet sharing unmistakable features now that she knew to look for to them, the same determined jaw, the same intensity in their eyes. "What's your proposal?" she finally asked. "There's a U.S. Marshal in Harper's Junction," Walsh said. "Incorruptible old bastard named Judge. Give him the documents. Let him handle Blackwood legally." "And what do you get out of this?" Wyatt pressed. "Time to disappear." Walsh's mouth twisted. "Once Blackwood realizes I've betrayed him, my life expectancy drops considerably." "How do we know you won't lead us into an ambush?" Eliza questioned. "You don't." Walsh spread his hands. "But consider the alternatives. Keep running, and Blackwood's Pinkertons will find you within days. Return to Silver Creek, and you walk into a trap." Wyatt and Eliza exchanged a long look. The plan had merit, despite the risk. Harper's Junction was closer than Cooperton, with a direct rail line to the capital. If they could reach Marshal Judge, the documents would finally reach proper authorities. "If, and that's a substantial if, we agree," Wyatt said slowly, "I want your word that no harm comes to Moses, Catherine, or the Reeds." "You have it," Walsh replied without hesitation. "I've already sent my men on a false trail north. As far as they know, I'm following a separate lead toward Cooperton." "And Thomas Harrington?" Eliza asked. "Is he safe?" "Your father's man?" Walsh raised an eyebrow. "He returned to the mining office this morning, apparently to assess damage. Seemed concerned primarily with salvaging company records." Eliza nodded, relieved. Thomas was maintaining his cover, keeping their plan viable from the Silver Creek end. "One condition," she said firmly. "You tell us everything about my father, about my mother's death, about Catherine Stone. No more secrets." Walsh considered this, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough, though you may not like what you hear." And they continued their journey with Walsh now guiding them along game trails and forgotten logging paths. Despite their lingering mistrust, his woodcraft proved superior. They covered more ground in the afternoon than they had all morning. As dusk approached, they made camp in a small cave formed by an uprooted tree and embankment. Walsh demonstrated unexpected practical skills, fashioning a small, nearly smokeless fire that provided warmth without betraying their position. Over a meager supper of the last provisions, he fulfilled his promise of truth. "Your mother didn't kill herself," he told Eliza bluntly. "Harrison made it look that way when she threatened to expose his business practices." Though she had suspected as much, hearing it confirmed still struck like a physical blow. He murdered her? His own wife? Not personally, no. Harrison Blackwood never dirties his own hands. Walsh's expression darkened. He hired it done, made it look like suicide, then used her death to control you more completely. "How do you know this?" Wyatt asked, still skeptical. "Because I've seen the records. Payments to the men who did it, coded as domestic staff severancy." Walsh met Eliza's gaze directly. "Your mother discovered Harrison's involvement in the deaths of several miners who refused to sell their claims. When Catherine Stone began investigating the same incidents, they formed an alliance." "And Catherine's fire?" Eliza pressed. "That was my father too?" Walsh nodded. "Though she wasn't supposed to survive. The fire was meant to destroy her research and credibility. Her survival as," he hesitated, "as she is now was an unexpected complication." "And Rebecca?" Wyatt's question was so quiet it almost vanished beneath the fire's soft crackle. "My wife's pneumonia. Was that Blackwood too?" Walsh looked away, unable to meet his half-brother's eyes. "Not directly, but when she fell ill, I delayed the doctor. Made sure help arrived too late." The admission hung in the air like poison. Wyatt's hand moved toward his rifle, fingers white-knuckled with restraint. "Why?" The single word contained volumes of pain and fury. "Orders," Walsh said simply. "Blackwood wanted you broken, your land vulnerable. When natural illness presented the opportunity, I took it." Eliza expected violence, would have understood it even, but Wyatt's reaction surprised her. He stood slowly, walked to the cave's entrance, and stared into the gathering darkness. When he spoke, his voice was controlled, deliberate. "If we survive this, if we succeed in bringing Harrison Blackwood to justice, you'll answer for what you've done," Wyatt said, each word measured and cold as winter stone. Walsh didn't flinch. "There are debts between us that can't be paid with words." His gaze drifted to the darkness beyond the cave. "Some sins mark a man forever." Something unspoken passed between the brothers, a recognition of shared blood and divided paths that might, in another life, have run parallel instead of crossing in violence. The night passed in uneasy rotation of watch duties. Despite physical exhaustion, Eliza found sleep elusive, her mind churning with revelations. Her father, the man who had raised her, who had seemed to grieve so genuinely for her mother, was a calculating murderer. Her entire life had been built on deception. Yet amid this devastation bloomed a strange relief. The inconsistencies that had always troubled her, the subtle wrongness she'd sensed but couldn't articulate, all explained at last. The truth, however horrible, provided a foundation on which she could finally build something authentic. Dawn brought renewed determination. According to Walsh, they could reach Harper's Junction by nightfall if they maintained a steady pace. The terrain grew more forgiving as they descended toward the valley, where the junction town nestled at the confluence of two rivers. As they rested, Eliza caught Walsh staring at a tattered photograph he'd pulled from an inner pocket, a faded image of a woman holding an infant. "My mother," he explained quietly, noticing her gaze. "Only thing I have of her." He studied the picture a moment longer before tucking it away. "She told me stories about my father before she died. Said he was a good man who would have stayed if he'd known about me." "Was that true?" Eliza asked. Walsh's mouth twisted in something between a smile and a grimace. "Spent half my life trying to find out." other half trying to forget I cared. His eyes drifted to Wyatt kneeling by the stream. When Blackwood told me who owned the land he wanted, showed me the name Sullivan. He shook his head. Fate has a cruel sense of humor. He straightened, the vulnerability disappearing as if it had never been. Around midday, they paused at a stream to refill their canteen. Wyatt knelt on the bank, attention focused on filtering water through a cloth. He doesn't trust me, Walsh observed quietly to Eliza. Smart man. She studied him curiously. Yet you seem to respect him. He's everything I'm not. Walsh's mouth quirked in a humorless smile. Honest, principled, the better son of a flawed father. People can change, Eliza suggested, surprising herself with the sentiment. Walsh regarded her with genuine amusement. The Blackwood heiress preaching redemption to her father's enforcer? Life takes unexpected turns. Before she could respond, Wyatt rejoined them, canteen secured at his belt. We should move. Still several miles to cover. They continued in silence, the forest gradually thinning as they approached more settled country. By late afternoon, they could see smoke from Harper's Junction chimneys rising beyond the next ridge. We'll wait for dark, Walsh decided. Too many eyes in daylight, and Blackwood may have telegraphed ahead. They found shelter in an abandoned line shack once used by railroad workers. While Wyatt checked the perimeter, Walsh drew a rough map of the town in the dust. Marshal's office is here, on the main street, he explained to Eliza. 2 deputies usually on duty. Judge himself lives above the office. Will he help us? She asked. A U.S. Marshal must have procedures, protocols. Judge is a law unto himself, Walsh replied. Fought for the Union, lost an arm at Antietam, hates corruption more than he loves rules. He smudged the map with his boot. If anyone will act on your evidence without bureaucratic delay, it's him. As darkness fell, Wyatt rejoined them with troubling news. Riders coming from the east. 6, maybe 8 men. Walsh cursed softly. Blackwood's Pinkertons. They must have guessed our destination. How? Eliza demanded. You said your men were following a false trail. Someone talked, Walsh said grimly. Or they're simply covering all possible exits. He peered through the shack's single dirty window. We need to move, now, before they reach the town. They slipped away as the distant riders crested the ridge, keeping to drainage ditches alongside the road. Harper's Junction revealed itself as a modest but prosperous settlement, a dozen buildings lining a main street, the railroad station at one end, a small hotel at the other. The marshal's office stood in the center, a solid brick building with barred windows and a weathered flag hanging limply in the still night air. No lights, White observed. Marshal might not be in. Office is never empty, Walsh countered. Someone's always on duty. They approached cautiously, using shadows for cover. The street lay quiet, most businesses closed for the night. Only the saloon showed signs of life, piano music and muted conversations spilling from its doors. As they neared the marshal's office, a prickle of warning raised the hair on Eliza's neck. The building's darkness seemed wrong, unnatural rather than unoccupied. She touched Wyatt's arm, signaling caution. Too late. The door burst open, light flooding the street as armed men emerged from concealment, weapons trained on the 3 travelers. Daniel Walsh, called a cultured voice from the shadows, punctual as always. And you've brought my daughter, I see. How considerate. Harrison Blackwood stepped into the light, immaculately dressed despite his journey. At 60, he remained an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, silver hair framing patrician features that had once graced the covers of financial magazines. Father, Eliza acknowledged, ice replacing blood in her veins. My dear, you've led us on quite a chase. Harrison's smile never reached his eyes. Time to come home. Where's Marshal Judge? Walsh demanded, hands raised as armed men surrounded them. Unavoidably detained, Harrison replied smoothly. Something about a disturbance in the next county. Most inconvenient for him to be absent, but fortunate for our purposes. Wyatt shifted slightly, positioning himself between Eliza and the nearest gunman. This won't end how you think, Blackwood. Mr. Sullivan, Harrison regarded him with the detached interest one might give an unusual insect. The tenacious rancher who refuses to sell. I believe we have mutual acquaintance. He glanced at Walsh, though perhaps more mutual than I realized. It's over, Harrison, Walsh said evenly. We have documentation of everything. So we have everything. The killings, the fraud, Charlotte's murder. Copies are already on their way to federal authorities. Something dangerous flickered across Harrison's composed features. Ah, Daniel, I expected better from you. After all I've done for you, all I've overlooked. He sighed theatrically. Your creative accounting, your private land acquisitions using company resources. Such disappointing disloyalty. You taught me well, Walsh replied, a bitter smile twisting his lips. Harrison turned his attention back to Eliza. Regardless, I've come to retrieve what's mine. The documents you stole, and of course, my only daughter and heir. I'm not yours, Eliza stated firmly. Not anymore. I know what you did to Mother. Charlotte made unfortunate choices, Harrison said, his voice hardening, as you are now, but family obligations remain. The Blackwood name and fortune will pass to you, whether you desire it or not. I renounce it, Eliza declared, to all of it. The name, the money, the legacy built on blood. Harrison's patience visibly thinned. Enough dramatics. You three will accompany us to the train station. My private car awaits. We'll sort out these misunderstandings on the journey east. You mean you'll dispose of us conveniently, Wyatt translated. Like you did with Catherine Stone, with Charlotte, with how many others? Business necessities, Harrison dismissed. Nothing personal. It was personal to them, Eliza said quietly, to everyone whose life you destroyed for profit. For a moment, genuine emotion cracked Harrison's facade, a flash of something like regret quickly subsumed by cold calculation. Secure them, he ordered his men, separately, and search them for any papers. The Pinkertons moved forward, professional and efficient. One reached for Eliza's arm, while another approached Walsh from behind. What happened next occurred with such speed that Eliza would later struggle to reconstruct the sequence. Walsh suddenly dropped to one knee, retrieving a small derringer from his boot. Wyatt lunged sideways, knocking Eliza to the ground as gunfire erupted. Pain exploded in her upper arm, a bullet graze that felt like fire across her flesh. She rolled beneath the boardwalk as more shots rang out, wood splintering above her head. Through gaps in the planking, she witnessed Walsh firing at the Pinkertons, creating space for Wyatt to reach the alley beside the marshal's office. Harrison had disappeared back into the building, his men forming a protective cordon. Eliza! Wyatt's urgent whisper came from the darkness between buildings. Can you move? She crawled toward his voice, ignoring the burning in her arm, while Walsh provided covering fire. Reaching the alley's mouth, she felt Wyatt's strong hands pull her to safety. Walsh? She gasped. Buying us time, Wyatt replied grimly, tearing a strip from his shirt to bind her wound. We need to reach the train station, get word to the capital somehow. They moved through back alleys and service yards, the sounds of gunfire fading behind them. The station lay dark and seemingly deserted, a single oil lamp illuminating the platform. There, Wyatt pointed to a private rail car coupled at the end of a small freight train. Blackwood's car. Probably has a telegraph inside. It'll be guarded, Eliza warned. We have no choice. Every lawman in town is either bought or removed. As they approached the rail car, the station door burst open. Thomas Harrington emerged, supporting a bloodied but very much alive Catherine Stone. Quickly, he hissed, gesturing them forward. Inside before they check here. Once inside the station house, explanations tumbled out in urgent whispers. Catherine had arrived that afternoon, having taken the eastern road as soon as it cleared. She had nearly reached the marshal's office when she witnessed Harrison's arrival with his Pinkertons. They've taken over the town, she explained, grimacing as Thomas bandaged a bullet wound in her shoulder. Judge is locked in his own jail, deputies with him. How did you find Thomas? Eliza asked. He found me, Catherine replied. Pulled me into a doorway when the shooting started. Said he was expecting you. Thomas nodded. I took the risk of telegraphing ahead, warning that trouble was coming. Didn't expect Blackwood to arrive first. Walsh knew, Wyatt said heavily. He led us into a trap. No, Thomas shook his head. Walsh double-crossed everyone. He sent a message to Blackwood saying he'd deliver you here, then telegraphed Judge warning of Blackwood's imminent arrival with armed men. He was trying to trap Blackwood, not you. But Judge never got the message, Eliza concluded. Blackwood's men intercepted it. They were waiting when Judge returned from his regular circuit, arrested him on false charges before he knew what was happening. Outside, new commotion erupted, shouting, running feet, the unmistakable sound of multiple horsemen arriving. Thomas peered through the slatted blinds. The rest of Blackwood's men, at least a dozen more. "We're trapped," Catherine stated flatly. "Not necessarily." Thomas turned to a large wall map of the railroad lines. "The midnight freight departs in 20 minutes. It stops at the territorial capital." "They'll search the train," Wyatt objected. "Not if they believe you've fled into the hills." Thomas's expression turned grimly resolved. "I can create that impression. Buy you time to board the last car." "They'll kill you," Eliza protested. "No," Thomas said with surprising confidence. "Harrison Blackwood needs me alive. I've managed his financial affairs for years, know where all the bodies are buried, figuratively and literally. My value exceeds his anger." Catherine nodded slowly. "It could work, but we'll need a distraction beyond Thomas's efforts." "The documents," Eliza said suddenly. "Where are they now?" Wyatt patted his coat. "Still secure." "Give them to Thomas," she instructed. "All except the pages about my mother." "What? Why?" Wyatt demanded. "Because my father will tear apart the hills looking for those papers. If Thomas has them, openly, visibly, Blackwood will focus on recovering them rather than pursuing us." Understanding dawned on Catherine's face. "And with Thomas's position, Harrison can't simply kill him and take them. He'll need to negotiate, which buys us time to reach the capital." "Precisely." Eliza turned to Thomas. "Can you hold him off? Keep him talking, demanding concessions until we're safely away?" "I can do better than that," Thomas replied, a slow smile spreading across his features. "I can make him believe I'm on his side, helping recover the documents from dangerous thieves, while actually ensuring copies reach every newspaper and federal office in the territory." The plan came together quickly. Thomas would return to Harrison, claiming to have spotted the fugitives heading for the hills. While the Pinkertons searched in that direction, the others would board the freight train bound for the capital. As they finalized details, a soft knock at the station door froze them in place. Wyatt raised his rifle while Thomas cautiously approached the entrance. "Who's there?" he called softly. "A friend," came the strained reply. "Open up, for God's sake." Thomas cracked the door to reveal Walsh, blood soaking his left side, face pale with pain and exertion. "You're alive," Eliza breathed as they helped him inside. "Not for long," he grimaced, collapsing onto a bench. "Caught 2 bullets. Internal bleeding, I expect." Wyatt examined the wounds with experienced hands. "He's right. Nothing to be done." Walsh waved away concern. "Doesn't matter. Did what I needed to." He coughed, blood speckling his lips. "Blackwood's men are searching the East Road. You have maybe 10 minutes before they realize I sent them on another false trail." "Why?" Wyatt asked, the single word encompassing volumes. "Debt paid," Walsh replied cryptically. His eyes found Eliza's. "Your mother was a good woman, better than any of us deserved. This doesn't balance the scales, but..." He shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Rebecca?" Wyatt asked, his voice barely audible. Walsh's eyes softened with unexpected compassion. "I never told you this, but the doctor confirmed later. She was already beyond saving when you sent for help. The consumption had spread too far, too fast. Even if I hadn't delayed him..." He paused, struggling for breath. "You need to know you couldn't have saved her. That burden you've carried all these years, it was never yours to bear." A complex emotion crossed Wyatt's face. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the first fracture in a wall of grief that had stood unbreached for years. He nodded once, accepting the truth if not the man who delivered it. The station clock chimed the quarter hour, reminding them of pressing reality. The freight train would depart soon, with or without them. "Go," Walsh urged. "I'll create one final distraction, something memorable." "Daniel," Wyatt began, using his brother's given name again. "Don't," Walsh interrupted. "We're past that now. Just go and make sure Harrison Blackwood answers for everything. All of it." The plan proceeded with desperate haste. Thomas departed first, documents concealed on his person, heading toward the marshal's office where Harrison had established temporary headquarters. Catherine and Wyatt made their way to the freight yard, using shadows and timing to avoid the few Pinkertons patrolling the area. Eliza lingered a moment with Walsh, whose breathing had grown increasingly labored. He'll never stop, Walsh warned her. Not while he lives. Harrison Blackwood believes you belong to him, same as everything else he possesses. I know, she said softly. Then be prepared for what that means. His eyes, already growing distant, held a final clarity. To win this fight, you may need to become something of what he is. I'll never be like him, Eliza stated firmly. Walsh's bloodless lips curved in a faint smile. Good, that's your strength. He pressed something cold and metal into her hand, a small key. Safety deposit box, First National Bank, Territorial Capital. More evidence, enough to bury him 10 times over. Why didn't you use it yourself? Insurance policy becomes more valuable the longer it's held in reserve. His voice weakened further. Now go. Make it count. She left him there, slipping out the back door toward the rail yard. Behind her, Ray's voices indicated Thomas had made contact with Harrison's men, directing them toward the eastern hills. The freight train stood ready for departure, steam hissing from its massive engine. Wyatt waited in the shadows beside the last car, helping Eliza climb aboard just as the conductor's whistle signaled imminent departure. As the train lurched into motion, an explosion shattered the night, the marshal's office erupting in flames and smoke. Walsh's final distraction, consuming evidence, creating chaos, ensuring their escape. Through the open door of the freight car, they watched Harper's Junction recede into darkness, flames painting the sky orange behind them. Catherine clutched the remaining documents, those detailing Charlotte Blackwood's murder, while Wyatt kept watch for pursuers. Eliza felt the weight of the small key in her pocket, Walsh's final gift. Insurance, he had called it, a weapon to be wielded at the right moment. The train gathered speed, carrying them toward the territorial capital, toward justice, toward an uncertain future that Eliza would shape on her own terms. Not as Harrison Blackwood's daughter, not as Wyatt Sullivan's rescue project, but as herself, a woman who had discovered her own strength in the crucible of truth. Beside her, Wyatt's hand found hers in the darkness, not grasping, not possessive, but offering support, partnership. She laced her fingers through his, accepting what was freely given. Behind them, fire consumed the lies of the past. Ahead lay dawn, and with it, the chance to build something new from truth's foundation. We're going to win this, she said softly. Not a question, but a declaration. Wyatt's answer was equally certain. Yes, together, we are. In that moment, as the train carried them through the night, Eliza knew they had already won the most important battle, the freedom to choose their own path forward, whatever challenges awaited. Like the river that had nearly claimed them, truth could not be contained forever. It found its way around obstacles, wore down resistance, and eventually, inevitably reached its destination. The sunrise, when it came, would illuminate a changed world, one where Harrison Blackwood would finally answer for his crimes, where Silver Creek might rebuild on honest foundation, where a woman named Eliza and a man named Wyatt could explore the connection growing between them without secrets or shadows. For now, the rhythm of steel wheels on rails marked their progress toward that future, steady, determined, and unstoppable as the dawn itself. 6 months later, Eliza stood on the courthouse steps in the territorial capital. Morning sunlight warm against her face. The headline of the newspaper in her hand proclaimed in bold type, "Mining magnate Blackwood sentenced. Justice for Silver Creek victims." Catherine Stone stood beside her, her scarred face exposed without shame to the public that had once dismissed her as a madwoman. Now they called her hero, whistleblower, champion of justice. "Your mother would be proud," Catherine said quietly. "Of both of us," Eliza replied, squeezing the older woman's hand. From across the square, Wyatt approached. He wore a clean shirt and vest, concessions of city life that couldn't disguise the rancher beneath. The months had softened something in him, though the strength remained undiminished. "It's done," he said simply. "Judge just confirmed the rest of the settlements. The Reed family and others will receive full compensation. The Silver Creek properties are being returned to their rightful owners." Eliza nodded, emotions too complex for words momentarily closing her throat. "And the mine?" "To be operated as a cooperative owned by the miners themselves." A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Moses is overseeing the transition, says it's keeping him young." As they walked away from the courthouse, Eliza felt the weight of the Blackwood legacy finally lifting. Harrison would spend his remaining years in prison, his empire dismantled, his crimes exposed. Yet she felt no triumph, only relief, in the quiet certainty that some endings were necessary for new beginnings. "Ready to go home?" Wyatt asked, offering his arm. Home. Such a simple word for the profound belonging she'd found. Not in Boston's mansions or Silver Creek's modest cabin, but in the truth they'd built together. "Yes," she said, taking his arm. "I'm ready." The morning sun cast their shadows long across the courthouse square, two figures walking in step toward a future neither could have imagined when a blizzard first crossed their paths. Behind them, Catherine smiled, watching the next chapter of their story unfold. The truth had set them free, just as surely as the sunrise after the storm.